Everyone in the courtroom believed the case was already over. Naomi Brooks sat alone at the small wooden table near the back, hands folded, eyes calm, dressed in a simple navy coat she had owned for years. No jewelry, no designer bag, no lawyer beside her, just a woman who looked like she had already lost. Across the room, Ethan Brooks leaned back confidently in his chair, expensive suit perfectly pressed, a Rolex catching the fluorescent light every time he moved his wrist. He smiled, not bothering to hide it. Today was supposed to be easy. His lawyers had done this dozens of times before. The judge glanced at Naomi's file, then at Ethan's legal team. So the petitioner accepts the divorce settlement with no claim to assets, no spousal support, and no further appeal? Yes, Your Honor, Naomi said quietly. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Ethan's lips twitched. Madeline Cross, seated behind him, leaned closer and whispered, "I told you. She's nothing without you." Naomi didn't look at them. She signed the final page without hesitation. No tears, no shaking hands, no drama. Just ink on paper. 5 years of marriage ended in less than 10 minutes. As the clerk collected the documents, Ethan exhaled in relief. This was it. No house split, no business exposure, no embarrassment. Naomi was walking away with nothing, exactly as he planned. Then the courtroom doors opened. A court officer stepped inside, confused. "Your Honor, we need to pause proceedings." The judge frowned. "For what reason?" The officer hesitated. "There's an aircraft requesting clearance nearby. A private jet just landed and is registered under court business." Laughter broke out. Someone scoffed. Ethan smirked, certain it had nothing to do with him. Naomi stood. For the first time, she lifted her head. Her voice was steady when she said, "That would be mine." The room froze. Ethan turned sharply, disbelief spreading across his face, as every eye shifted toward the woman he thought he had destroyed, not knowing this was the moment everything he built would begin to collapse. Before the courtroom, before the whispers and the shock, Naomi Brooks lived a life most people never noticed. Every morning, she walked 3 blocks to the community library, unlocking the side door before the sun fully reached the street. Her job was simple: organize returns, help seniors find large print books, guide children to reading corners. No one there knew she once argued complex contracts in glass offices overlooking Manhattan. They only saw a quiet woman who smiled politely and never talked about herself. Naomi lived in a rented 1-bedroom apartment above a bakery. The walls were thin. The radiator knocked all night. Her furniture came from Facebook Marketplace. Her phone was an old iPhone with a cracked corner she never bothered to replace, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't need to. What hurt wasn't the money. It was how easily people believed she deserved to fall. Ethan had made sure of that. After the separation, friends disappeared. Invitations stopped. His family stopped answering her messages. At school events, other parents avoided eye contact once they realized who she was. The woman who lost everything. The wife who walked away with nothing. But Naomi never corrected them. At night, after her daughter Sophie fell asleep, Naomi sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of reheated coffee and a thin stack of documents hidden inside a cookbook. Numbers, timelines, signatures, pieces of a past life she had never truly left behind. Sometimes, exhaustion hit her without warning, not the kind that sleep fixed, but the kind that came from swallowing words you were never allowed to say. From watching another woman step into your place and rewrite your story while you stayed silent. Still, Naomi never broke. She folded Sophie's clothes carefully. She showed up to every parent meeting. She read bedtime stories with steady hands. If Sophie sensed the weight her mother carried, she never said it, only held Naomi's hand a little tighter on the walk home. People mistook her calm for weakness. They thought silence meant surrender. What they didn't know was that Naomi was waiting. Not for revenge, but for timing. Because the truth, when revealed too early, gets buried. When revealed at the right moment, it destroys everything built on lies. And somewhere in Manhattan, a man who believed he had won was still smiling, unaware that the woman he dismissed was quietly preparing the ground beneath his feet to collapse. Ethan Brooks understood one thing better than most people. Perception was power. In the weeks leading up to the divorce, he made sure the story was told before Naomi ever opened her mouth. Quiet conversations at rooftop dinners, casual comments at charity events, carefully planted concerns shared with the right people at the right time. By the time the papers were filed, everyone already knew what had happened. Naomi couldn't keep up. Naomi had no ambition. Naomi chose a simple life and couldn't handle success. It was never said directly. It didn't have to be. Madeline Cross handled the rest. With her background in public relations, she knew how to polish a man's image until it reflected exactly what people wanted to see. She adjusted headlines, redirected questions, smoothed over timelines. The narrative became clean and effortless. A driven businessman moving on from a marriage that had simply run its course. At social events, Madeline stood beside Ethan like she had always belonged there. She laughed easily, touched his arm at the right moments. People noticed how alive he looked now. They congratulated him without realizing what they were congratulating. Ethan never corrected them. In private, he felt victorious. The house was his. The company was untouched. The future looked orderly again. Naomi had signed away any claim that mattered. In his mind, she had chosen obscurity. He had chosen forward motion. He didn't see cruelty in what he had done, only efficiency. When colleagues asked if Naomi was doing okay, Ethan sighed just enough to seem concerned. She wanted a quieter life, he would say. I think she's happier without all this pressure. Madeline admired him for that. She told him he had handled everything with grace, that not many men would have been so generous. Generous. The word settled comfortably in Ethan's mind. What neither of them realized was that control only works when the other person is still playing the same game. Ethan believed Naomi's silence meant agreement. He believed her absence meant defeat. He believed the story was finished because he had told it last. But stories don't end when one voice stops speaking. They end when the truth enters the room. And while Ethan enjoyed the applause of a world that believed him, Naomi was doing something far more dangerous. She was letting him grow comfortable inside a lie that was about to collapse under its own weight. The first real crack didn't come from the courtroom or the gossip. It came on a quiet Tuesday night, long after Sophie had fallen asleep. Naomi was sitting at the kitchen table, the bakery downstairs finally silent, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar notification. At first, she ignored it. Notifications from banks and agencies had become background noise since the separation, mostly automated messages, nothing urgent. But this one kept flashing. Urgent. Signature verification required. Her chest tightened. Naomi opened the email and read it once, then again. Slowly. Alone. 7 figures. Secured against a development project she vaguely recognized, one Ethan had mentioned in passing months earlier. What froze her wasn't the amount. It was the name at the bottom of the document. Hers. Her legal name. Her signature. Naomi stood so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. She pulled the old folder from behind the cookbooks, hand steady but cold. Contracts, copies, old correspondence. She found the document within minutes. It was real, and it was dangerous. Ethan had used her name as a guarantor without telling her. Worse, the timing was deliberate. The agreement had been signed while they were still married, when trust made questions feel unnecessary. If the project failed, the liability wouldn't land on his company. It would land on her. For the first time in months, fear slipped through Naomi's control. Not panic, but clarity sharp enough to hurt. This wasn't carelessness. It was strategy. Ethan hadn't just wanted to leave her with nothing. He wanted to leave her holding the risk. She sat back down slowly, staring at the signature that looked like hers, knowing exactly how it had been obtained. Papers slid across a kitchen counter. "Just routine," Ethan had said. "I'll explain later." Later never came. Naomi closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. If she reacted now, called him, accused him, exposed the document, it would disappear. He would deny everything, rewrite the story again. She wouldn't let that happen. Instead, Naomi made a choice that would change the direction of everything that followed. She forwarded the email to a single contact she hadn't spoken to in years. No explanation, no emotion, just one sentence. "I need to understand what this really means." On the other end of Manhattan, a man read the message and sat very still. Because Naomi Brooks wasn't just facing divorce anymore. She was standing at the edge of a collapse Ethan never imagined she could survive, let alone control. The next morning began like any other. Naomi walked Sophie to school, holding her small hand as they waited for the crosswalk light to change. The city moved around them, cars rushing past, people glued to their phones, a world that didn't pause for quiet disasters. Sophie swung her backpack gently, humming to herself, unaware of the storm her mother was carrying inside. It was only after dinner that the question came. They were sitting on the couch, a soft lamp glowing in the corner. Sophie curled against Naomi's side with a picture book open on her lap. Naomi barely noticed the pages turning. Her mind kept drifting back to the email, the signature, the risk that now had a name. "Mom?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Yes, sweetheart." Sophie didn't look up. Her voice was small, careful. "Did Daddy know you would be sad when he left?" Naomi felt her breath catch. She turned slightly, studying her daughter's face. The innocent seriousness, the way children asked questions not to wound, but to understand. Naomi chose her words slowly. "I think Daddy was thinking about himself," she said, "not about how other people might feel." Sophie nodded, absorbing that. Then she asked the question that broke through every wall Naomi had built. "So then why did you stop talking when he hurt you?" The room went very still. Naomi swallowed hard. Children noticed silence the way adults noticed noise. They sensed absence, weight, things unsaid. She realized then that her quiet endurance hadn't gone unseen. It had simply been misunderstood. "I didn't stop because I was weak," Naomi said gently. "I stopped because sometimes you have to listen before you speak." Sophie considered this, then frowned. "But if you don't speak, how will anyone know the truth?" Naomi felt tears rise before she could stop them. That was the moment. Not anger, not fear, not the document with her forged signature. Her daughter deserved more than survival. She deserved a mother who didn't disappear to keep the peace, a mother who showed her that strength didn't always shout, but it also didn't hide forever. Naomi kissed Sophie's hair and pulled her close. "I promise," she said softly, "you will see me speak at the right time." Sophie smiled, satisfied, and returned to her book. But Naomi didn't move, because in that quiet living room, she understood something with absolute clarity. This fight was no longer just about what Ethan had done to her, but about what she would allow her daughter to believe love and power looked like. Naomi waited 3 days before making the call, not because she was unsure, but because timing mattered. Panic would only scatter the pieces. She needed them aligned. When she finally dialed the number, she did it from the library after closing hours. seated at a desk no one used anymore, the glow of her MacBook reflecting softly against the darkened windows. Henry Lawson answered on the second ring. There was a pause when she said her name. "I was wondering when you'd reach out," he said calmly. Henry wasn't just any attorney. Years ago, before Naomi stepped away from her career, he had been her mentor, the man who taught her that contracts didn't just define agreements, they exposed intent. He specialized in corporate collapses, the kind that happened quietly before the headlines ever appeared. She didn't explain everything. She didn't need to. "I think my name was used as leverage," Naomi said, "and I think it was done deliberately." Henry asked for the document. She sent it without comment. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then Henry exhaled slowly. "This isn't just risky," he said. "It's reckless. And it tells me more about your ex-husband than he ever meant to show." Naomi closed her eyes, absorbing the confirmation she already knew was coming. "If this project fails," Henry continued, "he walks away bruised. You don't. You take the fall." Naomi's fingers tightened around the phone. "Can it be undone?" Henry didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was precise. "It can be exposed, and if we do it correctly, it won't just protect you. It will trap him inside his own decisions." That was the word she needed to hear. Trap. Henry explained the layers slowly. The marital timing, the consent loopholes, the assumptions Ethan made about Naomi's silence. Each sentence revealed a flaw Ethan never considered, because he never imagined Naomi would fight back. "Here's the important part," Henry said. "You don't move yet. You let him believe the story is finished." Naomi looked around the empty library, at the rows of books filled with truths waiting patiently to be opened. "I can do that," she said. When the call ended, Naomi sat very still. She wasn't afraid anymore, because now she understood the shape of what was coming, and for the first time since the divorce papers were signed, the power had quietly shifted, even though no one else in the world knew it yet. The divorce agreement had been drafted to look simple. That was the genius of it. Naomi read it again late that night, the pages spread across her kitchen table, Sophie asleep in the next room. At first glance, it was exactly what Ethan wanted the world to see. Clean lines, reasonable terms, no resistance. A woman giving up property, money, and future claims without protest. But Henry had taught her long ago that the most dangerous clauses were never the obvious ones, that they were buried. The agreement didn't just dissolve a marriage, it redefined responsibility. It confirmed timelines. It quietly acknowledged when certain decisions had been made, and by whom. Naomi traced the language slowly, her finger following phrases that once seemed harmless. Independent consent. Full disclosure acknowledged. Assumption of financial risk. Ethan had insisted on those words. At the time, Naomi remembered feeling strange about it. "It's just standard," he'd said, impatient, sliding the papers toward her. "This protects both of us." But it didn't. It protected him only if she stayed silent forever. Henry's voice echoed in her mind. "He assumed you'd disappear." By signing the agreement without argument, Naomi hadn't surrendered power. She had locked Ethan into his own version of events. Every clause now stood as proof of what he claimed, and what he denied. The loan, the signatures, the timing of decisions he insisted were transparent. All of it was documented. All of it could be challenged. And most importantly, it could be challenged at the worst possible moment. Naomi folded the papers carefully and placed them back into the envelope. There would be no late-night calls to Ethan, no emotional confrontation, no warning. She had learned something crucial about men like him. They only panicked when control was taken from them publicly. The following day, Ethan sent a message. "Everything's settled. Hope you find what you're looking for." Naomi stared at the screen, then locked her phone without replying, because what Ethan didn't understand was this. The agreement he believed ended the story was actually the foundation of its final chapter. It wasn't a surrender document. It was a record of arrogance, of assumptions, of a man who believed silence meant ignorance. Naomi stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, calm settling over her like armor. The trap wasn't closing yet, but it was already built. And when Ethan finally realized what he had signed himself into, there would be no clause left that could save him. That evening, Ethan Brooks celebrated like a man who believed the past was buried. The restaurant sat high above the city, glass walls framing the Manhattan skyline in a wash of gold and steel. The table was reserved under his name, and the kind of place where waiters spoke softly and never asked about prices. Ethan liked that. It made him feel untouchable. Madeline sat across from him, perfectly dressed, her confidence glowing brighter than the candle between them. She raised her glass first. "To clean endings," she said, "and new beginnings." Ethan smiled and clinked his glass against hers. To finally moving forward. Around them, the world felt easy again. No lawyers calling, no tense emails, no uncomfortable questions. The divorce papers were signed. Naomi had vanished exactly as he predicted. The risk, the noise, the inconvenience, gone. That was how he told the story to himself. He talked freely now, about expanding the company, about upcoming deals, about how much simpler life felt without having to explain himself to someone who never understood ambition. Madeline listened closely, nodding at the right moments, already imagining herself in the spaces Naomi once occupied. When Ethan excused himself to take a call, Madeline watched him with satisfaction. She had won. The house, the lifestyle, the future. Naomi Brooks was a closed chapter, a cautionary tale at best. Ethan returned to the table, phone tucked away, confidence unshaken. "Everything's lining up," he said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." He believed that. What he didn't know was that while he celebrated publicly, small things were already shifting quietly behind the scenes. An email unanswered longer than usual, a confirmation delayed, a name missing from a meeting invite he expected to receive. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, just enough to be overlooked by a man convinced he had already won. Madeline leaned closer. "Well, you handled this perfectly," she said. "Most men would have lost control." Ethan laughed. Control is just preparation. Naomi never prepared. The words settled comfortably between them. But control, when built on assumptions, has a weakness. It collapses the moment reality stops cooperating. And as Ethan raised his glass again, smiling into the reflection of city lights, he had no idea that the foundation beneath his confidence was already shifting. Because somewhere across the city, Naomi Brooks was doing the most dangerous thing of all. She was letting him celebrate too early. The courthouse buzzed with quiet confidence that morning. Lawyers moved through security with practiced ease, briefcases swinging, voices low and efficient. Ethan Brooks arrived early, flanked by his legal team, looking every bit like a man who expected nothing to go wrong. His suit was dark, tailored, familiar. This was his territory. Boardrooms, contracts, proceedings. He understood them all. Madeline walked beside him, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She wasn't required to be there, but she wanted to witness the final stamp of victory. She checked her phone, scrolling through messages, already imagining the next headline-free chapter of her life. Naomi Brooks was nowhere in sight. Ethan noticed immediately, though he pretended not to. He glanced once toward the benches, then again. Empty. No navy coat. No calm eyes. No quiet presence. "Running late?" Madeline asked lightly. Ethan shrugged. Or she changed her mind. Wouldn't be the first time. But a flicker of irritation crossed his face. The judge entered. Court was called to order. Names were read. Ethan's lawyers stood, confident and prepared. Then the judge paused. "Where is Ms. Brooks?" One of Ethan's attorneys cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we haven't been notified of any delay. She signed the agreement." The judge checked the clock. "We'll wait 10 minutes." 10 minutes passed slowly. Whispers began. A few curious glances turned Ethan's way. Madeline shifted in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. At the 15-minute mark, the judge frowned. "If the respondent does not appear..." The courtroom doors remained closed. Ethan's jaw tightened. He leaned toward his lawyer. "What's going on?" "We don't know," the lawyer admitted quietly. "But it shouldn't matter. The paperwork is valid." Still, something felt wrong. Naomi wasn't impulsive. She wasn't dramatic. If she disappeared, it wasn't because she was overwhelmed. It was because she chose not to be there. And that realization unsettled Ethan more than he wanted to admit. 20 minutes in, the clerk approached the judge with a note. The judge read it, eyebrows lifting slightly. "Court will remain in recess," he said slowly, "due to an external matter directly connected to this case." Ethan straightened. "What external matter?" The judge looked at him. "You'll find out shortly." For the first time that morning, Ethan felt something unfamiliar curl in his chest. Not fear, but uncertainty. The kind that arrived when a plan stopped responding. Outside, beyond the courthouse walls, something was approaching, and Naomi Brooks was no longer missing. Only she was simply arriving on her own terms, and whatever was coming next would make this courtroom the last place Ethan felt in control. At first, Ethan thought it was construction. A distant rumble, low and unfamiliar, crept through the courthouse walls, vibrating faintly beneath the polished marble floors. Conversations stalled. Heads turned instinctively toward the windows lining the upper corridor. The sound grew louder. Not chaotic, controlled, powerful. A court officer stepped briskly into the room, whispering something to the clerk, who immediately rose and moved toward the judge. Papers were set aside. The room shifted from routine to alert in seconds. Ethan felt it then, a tightening at the base of his neck. "What is that?" Madeline whispered, irritation edging her voice. "This place is supposed to be secure." The judge stood. "Nah, we will remain in recess until further notice." That was when the windows rattled slightly. Not enough to alarm, just enough to announce presence. Outside, beyond the courthouse plaza, a sleek private jet descended smoothly toward the nearby airfield, its engine slicing through the morning air with unmistakable authority. Phones appeared in hands. People pressed closer to the glass. Even seasoned attorneys paused, drawn by the sound of wealth moving without apology. Ethan stood slowly. His confidence didn't vanish all at once. It cracked. Private jets didn't arrive for family court proceedings. They arrived for executives, investors, people who didn't ask for permission. The clerk returned, her voice measured. "Your Honor, the incoming party has confirmed identity and relevance to this case." "Incoming party," Ethan repeated. "What party?" The judge met his eyes for the first time. "The respondent." The word landed hard. Madeline's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she whispered. "She doesn't..." The courtroom doors opened. Not dramatically, not rushed. Just enough. Naomi Brooks stepped inside. She wore a tailored coat, neutral and understated, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. No jewelry, no smile. But behind her walked two men who did not belong in this room by accident. One carrying a slim leather case, the other scanning the space with quiet authority. The murmurs exploded. Ethan stared, unable to move, as reality rearranged itself in front of him. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was preparation. Naomi met his eyes for the briefest moment, not with anger, with certainty. And in that instant, Ethan understood something far too late. The sound he had heard wasn't an arrival, it was a warning. The courtroom didn't breathe. Naomi stood just inside the doorway, the weight of every gaze pressing against her at once. Judges had seen panic, anger, desperation walk into their rooms before, but not this. Not a woman who entered, as if the room had been waiting for her all along. She took a single step forward, then another. The men behind her stopped near the door, respectful, silent. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. Their presence alone shifted the balance of the space, like gravity adjusting without warning. Naomi approached the respondents' table and sat, calmly. Ethan felt something slip inside his chest. Not fear, not yet, but disbelief so sharp it blurred his thoughts. This wasn't the Naomi he remembered. The woman who avoided confrontation. The woman who let conversations end early to keep peace. The woman who signed away everything without a fight. The judge cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks," he said carefully, "we were informed you would be delayed." "Yes, Your Honor," Naomi replied, her voice carried easily. "I wanted to arrive properly prepared." Prepared. The word echoed. Madeline leaned toward Ethan, her whisper tight. "Who are those men?" Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Naomi, searching for cracks. There were none. Naomi opened a slim folder and placed it on the table, aligning it with precise care. She didn't rush. She didn't perform. She simply existed, present, grounded, unshaken. "I previously accepted the settlement," she continued. "At the time, I believed it reflected the truth of our marriage." The judge nodded. "And now?" "And now," Naomi said, lifting her eyes, "I understand it reflects only one version of events." A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan's lawyer shifted uneasily. "Your Honor, the agreement has already been signed." "I'm aware," Naomi said, turning slightly toward him. Not confrontational, just firm. "That's why I'm here to clarify what that agreement actually confirms." She slid the folder forward. Inside were copies, timelines, signatures. Clean, organized, undeniable. Ethan's throat went dry, because in that moment it became painfully clear. Naomi hadn't come to beg, argue, or negotiate. She had come to document, to show the court exactly who made which decisions, when they were made, and who believed silence meant ignorance. Naomi folded her hands, eyes steady on the judge. "I'm ready to proceed," she said quietly. And for the first time since this process began, the room understood something fundamental had changed. This was no longer Ethan's story being told. It was Naomi's. The judge's eyes moved past Naomi, finally settling on the man who had taken the seat behind her. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't introduced himself. Yet his presence had been felt since the moment Naomi entered. He sat upright, hands loosely folded, dressed in a dark suit that carried no visible logos, no attempt to impress. Power, Naomi knew, rarely announced itself. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said slowly, "before we proceed, the court needs clarification. Who is present with the respondent?" The man stood. "My name is Caleb Wright," he said evenly. "I'm here in an advisory capacity." That was all. But the name moved through the room like a quiet shockwave. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He recognized it immediately. Anyone operating in Manhattan real estate did. Caleb Wright wasn't flashy, wasn't public-facing, but his firm controlled capital that made companies rise or disappear without headlines. Ethan had pitched to his associates once. He had never made it past the first meeting. Madeline's breath caught. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Why would he be here for her?" Caleb remained standing, eyes forward. "Ms. Brooks requested my presence due to overlapping financial exposure." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Overlapping how?" Caleb turned slightly toward Naomi, not for permission, but acknowledgement. Naomi nodded once. "She is a silent partner in an investment vehicle that intersects with assets referenced in this divorce agreement," Caleb said. "So her absence from prior discussions was strategic, not accidental." Ethan's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." So was the undisclosed use of her name as a financial guarantor, Caleb replied calmly, cutting through the interruption without raising his voice. The room stilled. Ethan stared at Naomi, his mind racing backward, replaying every moment he had dismissed, every paper he had rushed her to sign, every assumption that she had stepped away from the world he thought she didn't understand. Naomi met his gaze then, not triumphantly, not cruelly, just honestly. "I didn't disappear," she said softly. "I stepped back." The difference mattered now. Caleb sat down. The damage was done. Ethan felt it. The shift, unmistakable and irreversible. This wasn't a surprise entrance staged for drama. This was leverage revealed with precision. And as the judge called for the next document to be entered into record, Ethan realized the worst part wasn't the exposure. It was knowing Naomi hadn't needed saving. She had arrived with someone who chose to stand beside her, not because she was weak, but because she was worth backing. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Let the next set of documents be entered into the record," he said calmly. Naomi slid the folder across the table, stopping it precisely at the edge. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. The movement alone carried intention. This was no emotional appeal. It was procedure. Ethan's attorney took the folder, flipping through the pages too quickly at first, until his hand slowed. Timelines, email chains, contract copies, bank confirmations. His expression tightened. "Your Honor," the attorney said carefully, "these documents appear to reference transactions outside the scope of the divorce." Naomi spoke before the judge could respond. "They are within scope," she said evenly, "because the agreement explicitly confirms when certain financial decisions were made and who acknowledged full disclosure." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Page by page, the story Ethan believed he controlled began to unfold, not through accusation, but through sequence. Dates aligned, signatures matched. Clauses Ethan had insisted on now worked against him, anchoring responsibility exactly where he had claimed it belonged. Naomi remained seated, hands folded, voice steady as she clarified each point. She didn't dramatize. She didn't editorialize. She let the facts speak in the order they demanded: the loan, the guarantor, and the marital timing. Ethan felt the room closing in, not physically but socially. The murmurs weren't curious anymore. They were calculating. People were connecting dots he had assumed no one would ever look for. Madeline sat frozen, eyes darting between Ethan and the papers. This wasn't the story she had curated. This wasn't damage control. This was exposure. "Ms. Brooks," the judge asked, "why were these matters not raised earlier?" Naomi met his gaze. "Because raising them without proof would have made them disappear. I needed the record to confirm what had already been claimed." Ethan's lawyer swallowed. "Your Honor, my client maintains there was no intent to mislead." "Intent," Naomi said softly, "is established by preparation." Silence followed. The judge leaned back, eyes sharp now. "The court will need to reassess the settlement in light of this information." Ethan's heart dropped, because this was no longer about interpretation or persuasion. The truth was no longer waiting outside the room. It was officially on record. And once truth enters the record, it doesn't leave quietly. It stays, it multiplies, and it reshapes everything built on a lie. The first sign that everything was unraveling came from Madeline. She had built her confidence on control, on shaping stories, smoothing edges, deciding what the world was allowed to see. But as the judge continued reviewing the documents, her posture stiffened, fingers tightening around her phone, like it might anchor her to the version of reality she preferred. It didn't. Ethan's attorney requested a brief pause to confer. The judge allowed it. Chairs shifted. Whispers flared and died. Madeline leaned toward Ethan, her voice low and sharp. "You told me this was clean," she hissed. "You said she had nothing." Ethan didn't respond. He was staring straight ahead, jaw locked, watching the court clerk highlight sections of the agreement he once believed protected him. Clauses he had rushed Naomi through were now glowing under legal scrutiny. Madeline turned to Naomi then, eyes narrowing. "You planned this," she said under her breath. Naomi looked at her, not coldly, not triumphantly, but with something closer to pity. "No," Naomi replied quietly. "I prepared for it." That distinction landed harder than any accusation. The judge cleared his throat. "Ms. Cross," he said, scanning the names listed in supplementary materials. "You are identified here as having access to internal communications related to these transactions. Were you aware of them?" Madeline froze. She glanced at Ethan. He didn't look back. "I handle public relations," she said carefully, "not finances." "Yet your email appears in multiple threads coordinating messaging around these decisions," the judge said evenly. The room shifted again. Madeline's mask cracked, not in panic, but in realization. She hadn't just supported Ethan's narrative. She had amplified it, polished it, distributed it, and now it was tied to something far more dangerous than gossip. Ethan finally turned to her. There was no reassurance in his eyes, only calculation. That was when Madeline understood. She had never been a partner. She had been a shield. Across the room, Naomi remained still. She didn't need to push. The momentum had moved beyond her hands now. The truth, once exposed, had a gravity of its own. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "The court will be referring these matters for further review," he said. "This proceeding has exceeded its original scope." Ethan felt it then. The collapse not of reputation, but of certainty. And as Madeline sat back, color draining from her face, she realized too late that she had backed the wrong story. Because when lies start falling, they don't protect anyone standing behind them. And Naomi Brooks wasn't watching with satisfaction. She was watching with the calm of someone who knew this was only the beginning of accountability. The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed completely. What began as a routine confirmation hearing now carried the weight of something far larger. The judge sat straighter, his tone no longer procedural but deliberate, as if he were carefully choosing words that would echo long after the room emptied. "This court will not finalize the existing settlement today," he said. "There are unresolved issues that directly affect its validity." Ethan's attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, with respect." The judge raised a hand. "With respect, counsel, your client's certified disclosures that now appear incomplete at best and misleading at worst." That was the moment Ethan understood control was gone. Not slipping. Gone. He leaned forward, fingers gripping the edge of the table. The confidence that once held him upright, now replaced by something brittle. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, unable to stop himself. "My ex-wife signed willingly." Naomi turned toward him slowly. "I did," she said, "based on what you told me." The judge's eyes narrowed. And that distinction matters. Documents were rearranged, notes exchanged quietly between court officers. A clerk stepped out, and returned with additional files already requested by Chambers. Things were moving faster than Ethan could follow. The judge continued. Given the financial entanglements presented today, the court is ordering a temporary hold on asset protections related to Mr. Brooks's company. Madeline gasped softly. Ethan's attorney stiffened. Your Honor, this is not a punishment, the judge said evenly. It is a safeguard. But Ethan felt it like a blow. A safeguard meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant exposure. Exposure meant investors asking questions he could no longer answer with confidence. Naomi sat quietly as the consequences unfolded, see her expression unchanged. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't relieved. She simply watched the process work the way it was designed to. Slow, methodical, unavoidable. Ethan glanced at her, then really looked at her, and realized how deeply he had misjudged the woman across the table. She hadn't come to win an argument. She had come to let the system do what it always did when given the truth. The judge set the next hearing date and struck the gavel lightly. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed. As people stood and gathered their belongings, Ethan remained seated for a moment too long, the world around him suddenly unfamiliar. The story he had shaped so carefully was no longer his to tell. Because from this point forward, the court was no longer listening to assumptions. It was listening to facts. Well, the fallout didn't wait for another court date. By the time Ethan stepped out of the courthouse, his phone was already vibrating non-stop in his pocket. He ignored it at first, lifting his chin as cameras flashed from a distance. He told himself this was temporary, a misunderstanding, something his lawyers would smooth over the way they always had. But control doesn't vanish all at once. It fractures. The first call he answered was from his chief financial officer. The man's voice was tight, professional, and unmistakably alarmed. Ethan, 2 investors just requested an emergency briefing. They've seen the court notice. Ethan's grip tightened. It's routine, he said sharply. Tell them that. There was a pause. They're not treating it like routine. Inside the black sedan waiting at the curb, Ethan finally checked his messages. Missed calls, emails marked urgent, a calendar alert canceled without explanation. One message stood out, a short note from a board member who had never canceled anything before. We need distance until this is resolved. Madeline slid into the seat beside him, silent now, her earlier confidence gone. She scrolled through her own phone, color draining from her face. They're tagging me, she whispered. Reporters, analysts. People are asking why my name is in those emails. Ethan didn't answer. By that evening, the shift was undeniable. A development partner postponed signing. A lender requested revised terms. A deal that had taken months to assemble was suddenly under review. No accusations yet. No headlines. Just hesitation. And hesitation was deadly. Ethan sat alone in his office long after the staff had left, so the city lights flickering outside his window. This was how collapse really started. Not with scandal, but with silence. With people stepping back, protecting themselves, leaving him exposed. Across the city, Naomi watched none of it directly. She cooked dinner. She helped Sophie with homework. She listened as her daughter talked about her day, nodding at the right moments. The world Ethan had built was unraveling, but Naomi didn't celebrate it. Because this wasn't revenge. It was consequence. Every call Ethan missed, every deal delayed, every door quietly closing, traced back to choices he had made when he believed no one was watching, when he assumed silence meant safety. Late that night, Ethan finally sat back in his chair, exhaustion settling into his bones. For the first time, he understood the truth he had avoided. Naomi hadn't destroyed him. She had simply stopped protecting him from himself. Sophie didn't know about courtrooms, investors, or documents with too many words. She only knew that her mother's shoulders felt lighter that afternoon, They were sitting on a bench near the school playground, the late sun stretching long shadows across the pavement. Sophie kicked her legs gently, watching other children run, then looked up at Naomi with the kind of seriousness that always arrived without warning. "Mom," she said, "are you still sad about Daddy?" Naomi paused. She had learned not to rush answers with children. Truth mattered, but so did shape. She chose her words carefully. "I'm not sad the way I used to be," she said. "I'm clearer now." Sophie thought about that, brow furrowing. "Is Daddy mad at you?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Daddy is dealing with the choices he made." Sophie nodded slowly, then said the one thing Naomi hadn't expected. "He used to tell me not to tell secrets if they were wrong," Sophie said. "But he told me not to talk when he yelled at you." The air shifted. Naomi turned fully toward her daughter, heart tightening, not with pain, but with understanding. "And how did that make you feel?" Sophie shrugged. "Confused, because you were being quiet, but you weren't wrong." Naomi felt tears press behind her eyes. Not grief, release. "That's very smart," she said softly. "And you're right." Later that week, Sophie's words traveled further than Naomi ever intended. At a routine check-in with a school counselor, one Naomi had scheduled months earlier, Sophie repeated them simply, without drama or accusation. Just facts, unspoken with the honesty only children carried. The counselor listened, took notes, asked gentle questions. No one panicked, no one accused, but records were updated, patterns acknowledged. And when Ethan was later asked, in a completely separate setting, to clarify certain behaviors he had always dismissed as private matters, he found himself without the easy answers he used to rely on. Because a child hadn't accused him. She had remembered him. Naomi never used Sophie as leverage, never pushed her forward, never asked her to speak again. She didn't need to. One truth, spoken once, had settled exactly where it belonged. That night, Naomi tucked Sophie into bed and kissed her forehead. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. Sophie smiled sleepily. "I know." And as Naomi turned off the light, and she understood something deeply reassuring, strength didn't always roar, and truth didn't need repetition. Sometimes, all it took was a single honest voice to make sure the story could never be rewritten again. The offer came quietly. No press, no announcement. Just a sealed envelope delivered to Naomi's apartment one afternoon while Sophie was at school. Naomi recognized the handwriting immediately. Clean, precise, intentional. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she made tea, stood by the window, and watched the city move the way it always had, indifferent to individual victories and losses. This moment wasn't about speed. It was about clarity. When she finally opened the envelope, the contents were exactly what she expected. A revised settlement proposal. Not from Ethan directly, but through legal counsel. Asset restitution. On financial compensation. Protective clauses that acknowledged, in careful language, what the court process had already made obvious. Ethan was trying to contain the damage. Henry called minutes later. "If you accept this," he said, "it ends the escalation. If you don't, the next phase will be thorough." Naomi understood what that meant. Audits, reviews, a process that would not stop until there was nothing left to examine. She could press forward and watch the collapse complete itself. She set the papers down. That evening, Naomi walked with Sophie through the park, leaves crunching underfoot. Sophie talked about a school project, about a drawing she wanted to finish. Naomi listened, grounding herself in the rhythm of her daughter's voice. Later, after Sophie fell asleep, Naomi made her decision. She didn't accept everything. She accepted only what restored balance, the funds that had been improperly shifted, the protections that ensured Sophie's future. The acknowledgement on record that certain actions had consequences. She declined anything that felt like conquest. Henry was quiet when she told him. "You're sure?" "Yes," Naomi said. "I don't need to erase him. I just need to step out from under him." The following morning, the response was filed. Ethan's legal team was stunned, not by what Naomi took, but by what she refused. There would be no drawn-out destruction, no public spectacle beyond what had already occurred. For Ethan, that was the cruelest part, because Naomi's choice made it clear this had never been about revenge. She didn't need him ruined to feel restored. She needed freedom, and she had claimed it without becoming what he expected. As Naomi closed her laptop, a calm settled over her. This was the moment she reclaimed something far more valuable than money. She reclaimed authorship of her life, and from this point on, every step forward would be hers to choose. Naomi didn't expect anything after the settlement closed. No messages, no gestures, no promises. Life settled into something quieter, steadier. Mornings were for school drop-offs, and coffee brewed just right. Evenings were for homework, shared dinners, and the slow rebuilding of routines that felt earned, not borrowed. Caleb Wright remained present, but never intrusive. He didn't call every day. He didn't ask questions that reached too far. When they spoke, it was about ordinary things. A book he thought Sophie might like, a park Naomi hadn't visited yet. Conversations without pressure, without expectation. That was what disarmed her. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb invited Naomi and Sophie to the waterfront. Nothing formal, no reservations, just walking along the river, the skyline stretching wide and unbothered above them. Sophie ran ahead, chasing birds, her laughter echoing freely. Naomi watched her, heart full in a way that surprised her. Caleb stopped near the railing. "I never wanted to step into your life as a solution," he said quietly. "You never needed one." Naomi turned to him, listening. "I chose to stand beside you because of how you handled everything," he continued. "Not the intelligence, not the restraint, but the way you refused to let pain turn you into someone else." Naomi felt something loosen inside her. Caleb reached into his coat pocket, not dramatically, not hurried. He didn't kneel. He didn't draw attention. He simply held out a small ring, understated and elegant. "I'm not asking you to start over," he said. "I'm asking if you'd like to build forward, together, at your pace." Naomi didn't answer immediately. She thought of the woman she used to be, the silence she had carried, the choices she had reclaimed, and the child who now ran back toward them, breathless and smiling. "Mom," Sophie said, "did I miss something?" Naomi laughed softly and pulled her close. "No," she said. "You're right on time." She looked back at Caleb, certainty settling gently into place. Not fireworks, not urgency, just alignment. "Yes," Naomi said. Caleb smiled, not in triumph, but in relief. The city moved on around them, indifferent and vast, but for Naomi, something had quietly completed its arc. She hadn't been rescued. She hadn't been rewarded. She had been met. And after everything she had endured, that felt like the most extraordinary ending of all. Life didn't transform overnight. There were no headlines announcing Naomi Brooks's new beginning, no dramatic redemption arc for public consumption. Instead, her life softened in ways that only those living inside it could feel. Mornings began with sunlight through the kitchen window, and Sophie humming as she packed her school bag. Naomi worked from home now, consulting selectively, choosing projects that aligned with her values instead of her ego. Her laptop closed at dinner time. Her phone stayed face down more often than not. Peace, she learned, was intentional. Ethan faded from her world gradually, not erased, but reduced to what he truly was, a chapter, not a defining one. The consequences he faced followed their course quietly, business recalibrations, relationships that no longer answered his calls, a reputation reshaped by his own decisions. Naomi didn't monitor it. She didn't need to. She had already moved on. Caleb didn't rush the future. They planned slowly. Conversations about schools, about travel, about what kind of home felt right, not impressive. Sophie adjusted naturally, sensing safety without needing it explained. She laughed more, slept better, asked fewer worried questions. One afternoon, as they walked through Central Park, Sophie reached for Naomi's hand and said, "You smile different now." Naomi knelt beside her. "How?" "Like you're not waiting anymore," Sophie said. Naomi hugged her tightly, eyes closing. That was it. She wasn't waiting for approval, for apology, for validation. She wasn't proving anything. The quiet strength she had built no longer needed to stand against anything at all. Months later, on a small terrace overlooking the city, Naomi married Caleb. No spectacle, no audience beyond those who mattered. Sophie walked between them, holding both their hands, smiling proudly. Naomi didn't feel like she had won. She felt like she had arrived. At night, when the city lights blurred softly beyond the windows, Naomi sometimes reflected on the woman she used to be, the one who mistook endurance for destiny. She didn't regret her past. It taught her discernment. It taught her patience. It taught her that silence, when chosen, could be powerful. But voice, when claimed, was freedom. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for Naomi Brooks, that was everything. Because the greatest justice wasn't watching someone else fall. It was standing fully in a life she chose, unafraid, unburdened, and finally, at peace. And so the story comes to a close. Now, my wonderful friends, if you are still here with me at this moment, then something in this journey has touched your heart in a quiet but real way. And I want to speak to you, not as a narrator anymore, but as someone sitting beside you, looking back together. Naomi's story reminds us of a truth the Stoics have taught for centuries. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Naomi didn't win because she shouted louder or destroyed someone else. She won because she reclaimed her inner authority. She chose clarity over chaos, dignity over revenge, and patience over impulse. Life will test us unfairly. People may misunderstand us, or use our silence against us, or benefit from our kindness. But as Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Healing begins the moment we stop living to prove our worth and start living by our values. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own quiet strength, your own unfinished healing, then you're not alone. Stories like this exist to remind us that calm can be powerful, and choosing yourself is never selfish. If you felt something today, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that heal, not just entertain. Before we close, we want to be clear with our viewers. This story is a work of fiction, created for storytelling, reflection, and emotional inspiration. Any names, characters, businesses, or situations portrayed are imagined and are not intended to represent real people or actual events. While the themes of resilience, healing, and personal growth are grounded in real human experiences, the narrative itself is crafted to explore emotional truth rather than document factual history. Our goal is to share meaningful stories that encourage thought, empathy, and positive reflection, not to present news, legal advice, or verified real-life cases. We invite viewers to see this content as a cinematic drama designed to inspire and entertain. If parts of the story felt familiar or relatable, that connection comes from shared emotions, not from real-world claims. Thank you for watching with an open heart and understanding, and for supporting thoughtful storytelling on this channel.